Day is a public interest environmental law firm. We do a wide spectrum of environmental cases. We know River Action, they got in touch because they were very concerned about what was happening in the Wye Valley. Do you want to catch us up on how it's been going with the community meetings?
The firm's working on a range of issues in the Wye Valley. We brought a claim for judicial review on behalf of River Action. That was the first big case that we worked on, and that led in some ways to the private law claim which our colleagues are bringing against the polluters. The plan is to have thousands of local people as our clients, and it's their interests that the firm would need to represent in court.
I think first off, it was just really great to be out in the community. There's so much passion for the issue. It really is just important to have a large cross-section of the community behind you so that the court can see how much people care about this issue.
Local people and local campaigners are the key. They're the drivers of all of this, and none of what we do would be done without them. We need to make sure that we're bringing a case that meets their objectives. So we need to understand what are the issues that are important to them. They know what's happening on the ground or in the river. We've got to listen to that and make sure that the case reflects that. So how many have you actually got signed up at the moment?
Yeah, I mean we're just over 1,000 now. So to have that level of response this quickly, I think is really exciting.
That's great.
It just shows people are sort of behind it as a cause and think that litigation is something that can be used to help.
A judge is going to be much more willing to listen if there's a big campaign behind the case. And really the legal case is just one aspect of the wider campaign. So I would say that we're part of the campaign rather than local people feeding into our cases.
It's very emotive hearing some people describe how they've been impacted. So for example, one of our clients he has a house which is on the river and he's having to sell it because he can't bear to look at the river anymore. He's lived there for 10-15 years and he's seen it decline.
Well, it's a very exciting time to be an environmental lawyer. It's also quite a challenging time, having come out of the EU. A lot of our environmental legislation is EU-based, particularly things like the Habitats and Birds Directive. They've been the cornerstone of our legislation that we rely on heavily still. And then we've got domestic legislation, things like the Wildlife and Countryside Act, the Environment Act more recently, and all of these things, we're basically using all of these pieces of legislation as tools to help us in our day-to-day job. In addition to those sort of broad-ranging pieces of legislation, we have legislation around participatory rights, we call it. It might be the right to know, so the right of access to environmental information. And we have two regimes that operate in the UK. One is a more general Freedom of Information Act, and then we have the Environmental Information Regulations. The really good thing about these participatory rights is that everybody can use them. They're not just there for lawyers, they're there for the public, for community groups, for NGOs to use. And it's really easy to put in a request under the Environmental Information Regulations. You can fire off an email, you can even just ask on the phone. If you can be quite specific about the information that you're after, very often you can get hold of really, really useful information. And that the point about that is to see how groups like WASP and River Action have used the information they've been able to get out of water treatment companies to really hold them to account on their environmental performance. None of that information would have been possible to get hold of if it hadn't been for the regulations. So you can make good use of them. These are public bodies, they're performing public functions, even when they're privatised. They might be privatised water companies, they're performing public functions. So that information should be in the public domain. While it's very, very important to get hold of data about the environment, some of the other things that you can get hold of through the regulations are other pieces of legislation. It might be policies about the environment, it might be cost-benefit analyses about the environment, it might be environmental agreements. And these documents give you a clue as to how environmental decision-making has been made by regulators. And sometimes that's the nuts and bolts of what can then go on to form a legal challenge. So very often you've got community groups getting data together. They're the people on the ground, they're the experts on the ground, they've got the historical knowledge, they've got the involvement in the issues, they've got the data. You then put that together with some scientific involvement to interpret that data, and then working with the lawyers as part of a much wider campaign, you can then often take yourself forward into the sort of legal arena. And we've seen that with lots and lots of cases where community groups have really empowered themselves with data, with evidence, with information from public bodies. And they've come to lawyers like us and they've said, well, what can we do to address this problem? And very often out of that we can construct a case. And before you know it, you can be in the High Court, challenging a really important point of principle, which not only might affect the environment that you're seeking to protect, but which also could actually change the landscape of the law across the whole of the country.